Delaware Data Innovation Lab. Data science driven by community. Come change the world with us.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ann Klaus, and I'm the Executive Director of the DDIL, as we call it. Devin, thank you so much for always teeing up these meetups in this virtual world. And Bri, Jim, and Michael, thank you for joining us today. Before I turn it over to Ben and our able assistant in the background, Dan, let me just bring everyone up to date on the lab. One, thank you for joining us, at least on the East Coast. It is a gorgeous day here in Delaware. Today, I got my vaccine, so this is being recorded, so let it be recorded that I'm very happy. Drove down to Camden, Delaware to get my vaccine. So happy about that. And I know a lot of people are spending the week either on spring break with their children, Passover has passed, Easter is coming, and maybe you're just celebrating spring. So welcome everyone, and thank you for spending this afternoon with us. Today's topic I'm very excited about. It's a big part of who the DDIL is because AR/VR is sort of the nexus of collaborative and collective data. So I'm excited to talk about the conversation, to keep that conversation going. It's a very nascent field, as we know, but it's only going to get bigger and be more powerful in the future. An update from the lab itself. We're sort of at a new season. We finished our first 6 problem sets. That was our inaugural set, and we've graduated our first group of fellows. In our next season, we're already scoping out and looking at our new set of problem sets. And in a few weeks to months, we'll be hiring and bringing in our next set of cohorts of fellows. One thing that is constant through the seasons is this idea of collective and collaborative data. And our first 6 problem sets showed us that. All of our stakeholders, all of our partners, everyone who sort of came on to this new idea of the DDIL was always asking, how do you look at a diverse set of data with a diverse set of eyes? And saw that our value is that unique platform to do that. Whether it's academic, whether it's government, whether it's corporate, or whether it's the community that we serve. People like what we do, and we will build off that collective and collaborative data. I'd like to speak to you who are out there listening to us. To that point, if you have ideas, if you're like, man, what if I could take this and look at it with that, what would happen? And if only I could bring together these people and bring together these different data sets, what would happen? And often in your day job, you don't have that time. You don't have that ability. You just don't have that bandwidth with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. The lab is that space, and we get people coming in every day with ideas saying, could you look at this? Could you look at that? So if you have those questions, if you have those nagging, like, man, I'd love to be able to do that, reach out, talk to us. You never know if it's going to end up in one of our problem sets, which it more than often does. So to you out there, our audience, you are our diversity. And so bring us your ideas, because it's only going to make our innovation space that much more powerful. So Ben, I will turn it over to you for the great panel for the day. Ben Cates.
Great. Thanks, Anne. Really excited to be here, everybody. My name is Ben Cates. I work on the Compass Red team. I'm a data analyst, creating data tools for our clients and working closely with our data science team to deliver on initiatives. And over the last 6 months or so, I've had the pleasure of working with the Delaware Data Innovation Lab, specifically on the research we've done into AR and VR and how that can be effective for communicating insights and working collaboratively in this time of virtual work. And so I'm going to dive into a little bit of an overview of some of the work the lab has done, and then introduce our panelists, who are all partners in this process. So really looking forward to the discussion. And as always, ask questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll field them towards the end. So just giving you an overview of where we started 6 months or so ago. We were really looking into what problem sets and what areas of research the lab could initiate. And one is AR and VR. And so for those who are completely new to the area, AR, augmented reality, VR, virtual reality, sometimes together they're referred to as XR, extended reality, combined together. And so just again, for those who are completely new, virtual reality is going to be a headset where you're completely encompassed in the world. So the Oculus Quest 2 headsets you see here are an example of virtual reality. And then AR, augmented reality, is going to be something like your phone face pointed at your face for maybe like a Snapchat filter would be a example of augmented reality, putting the virtual world on top of the real world. And so what was the problems that we were looking at in the beginning? We're all actively engaged in this setting right this moment, right? We're all meeting in this Zoom format, and it's difficult to make decisions together. It's difficult to collaborate in this setting. And so as we are increasingly more virtual, and it seems like virtual work will be a part of our lives for a long time to come, how can we help individuals make better decisions and lead to less negative outcomes? And for healthcare, that's less lives lost as a solution to the negative problems. So we wanted to give a highlight of work that we've explored here. I'll just give a little bit of a voiceover. So this is Virtualytics. It's we've kind of deemed it as 3D Tableau. This is a great software for looking at your data sets in multiple 3D visualizations. We've really got a lot of value out of those 3D visualizations here in the immersive environment. The geospatial analytics capabilities here are really interesting. In this case, we're looking at hotspots throughout Delaware alongside anonymized mobility data. And then of course, there's the virtual room element to that. Next, we were diving into spatial, which Bri will talk more about. Essentially, we've looked at spatial as a virtual collaboration room with your virtual avatar and your voice represented in the room with that geospatial audio, allowing you to bring in 2D assets and 3D assets. In this case, we're looking at a number of COVID trends in Delaware, as well as some articles. And this has been really great to be immersed in the same environment with colleagues and feeling like we're there together. What's great about spatial is you can add in 3D models. And so we've looked at how we can take 3D geospatial models and import them into spatial and have them be a part of the conversation for analysis. In this example, we were looking at a hotspot, a COVID hotspot in Delaware surrounded by nursing homes. And here Dan and I, shout out to Dan Barlow on the lab team, looking at some stuff there. So Flow Immersive, which Michael will be talking a bit more about, is a great data storytelling tool. And the evictions team at the lab was looking at the racial disparities in evictions throughout the last year versus previous years. And this tool is really, really excellent for being completely immersed in a dynamic data story. And you can see here an example of multiple people in the same room working together. So that's a quick overview of some of the work we've done at the lab. And I'm going to have a visitor, Abigail, come here. And she is all over the keyboard. This is great timing. Let me go here. So one of the things we were looking at recently with Jim McAdams, who's here with us as a panelist, and his team, Dr. Mark Schneider, head of the Applied Innovation Group at Christiana Care, was really looking at like what are the capabilities in spatial and how can we really push the tool to its limits for analysis and collaborative discussion. And one of the more recent really outstanding capabilities was 3D city replication. So you can see here Wilmington as a 2D map, and then we've taken publicly available 3D building assets and overlaid them on top. And we really see this as an interesting development in the realm of geospatial analytics, city planning, stuff like that. And it was really excellent to have, I think we had like 6 or 7 folks in the room sort of standing above the city, looking at just how vast the city is and looking at all of the buildings really adds to the ability to take in information. So what are some of our learnings from this? This is from some internal notes and presentations here. Data story and data prep are key. As data analysts, this is always the case, but in a virtual environment, this is heightened. It's your data story and the work that you've put into create an analysis is on full display. And if anything, it's even it's going to resonate even more with your audience. So the background and the work that's gone into it really needs to be sound. Immersion is effective for communication. This is us essentially saying, hey, it is really cool. It is really effective to be in the same room, in that virtual setting, discussing things and learning together over the standard 2D Zoom like we're in right now. And virtual versus augmented reality, we're still looking at this, but essentially we've kind of come to the conclusion that to feel like you're all in the same room, the virtual reality setting is key. Augmented reality is nice because you have the real world around you, so you don't feel like you're completely isolated. But the virtual reality element is something where you can really be focused. You don't have the distraction of maybe other windows on your computer or your phone in your pocket that could be calling your attention. So this is an overview of some of the work that we've done and has involved some of these folks. And so please welcome Bri Scully, Customer Experience Manager at Spatial, Jim McAdams, part of the Applied Innovation Group at Christiana Care, and Michael DiBenigno, Head of Business at Flow Immersive. So why don't we go down the line and have everyone introduce themselves, starting with you, Bri.
All right. Hi, my name is Bri Scully. I'm Manage Customer Experience at Spatial. For those of you who don't know, we got a little introduction to what Spatial is, but we are a AR and VR collaboration platform. So we work across a whole wide variety of different headsets, which I can touch on more later, but our goals are really accessibility as well as, bringing people together in AR and VR. And I'll pass it over to Jim.
Thanks, Bri. Jim McAdams. Spent most of my career in IT and technology strategy, mostly pharmaceuticals and healthcare. Been with Christiana Care about 1.5 years. Very excited about the role playing in applied innovation and digital acceleration. So taking new technologies, new innovations, and finding ways to make them really add value within the healthcare system. So Michael, you want to give an intro next?
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Hi, I'm Michael DiBenigno. I like to say I'm a recovering management consultant and really saw Flow Immersive as this next iteration of how we more effectively communicate with data at its core. And I think at our core, our ethos, we believe that more data is not going to change the world, but more effectively communicating with the data that we do have will. And the one thing that I'll posit that's sort of a little different than perhaps these other some of the other things we'll cover is that we think about it as this sort of road of how you engage with someone. That includes, integrating into Zoom, working in AR and VR. It sort of depends on all these mediums. And by working across devices, we're focused on the message at its core. And that's sort of what we're fundamentally doing. And I love, Ben, that you already pointed out that, the story is what matters. Because right now, I think there is somewhat of a fantasy that I'm going to throw my data into 3D space and suddenly every insight's just going to come to me. And we're just going to have this epiphany. Unfortunately, that's not quite the case yet. And you still need to have some analysis done and to have that story. And we think that, AR and VR is one of the most effective vehicles for delivering and communicating that message. And so at our core, we are a data storytelling platform that works across all of these devices. And so with that, the AR aspect, even we can create videos and other elements. And I won't go too far into detail to take up too much time here, but it's been really exciting to see the reaction to even just these videos that we've been putting out there. We got 9 million views in a matter of 3 months, and I think it just shows that especially with Gen Z, they're sort of a camera first generation, and when we show these AR and VR data visualizations, it just innately clicks with them. There's no additional explanation needed. And it's been really exciting to see that response and just feel like this is the evolution of where we're going with storytelling. So pleasure to be here, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, and thanks for diving into some of those key points, Michael. I'm really looking forward to talking some more about this. So let's start with you, Jim, because I think we first connected probably 1.5 years ago, possibly more, when we stepped into your office and took a look at some of the work you were doing. And I know Patrick Callahan and I were just completely mind blown at some of the work you were doing, both with HoloLens and Spatial at the time, as well as with I believe it was the Oculus
Quest
Rift.
and the Rift.
Oh, okay. And the Rift, yeah. And with Virtualytics. And so
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit more about what you and the team at ChristianaCare have been doing in the last couple of years, and what intrigued you about exploring this?
Sure, no problem. I think the most well-known use we have of VR technology is in our chemotherapy center. We're using it for positive distraction therapy. So our Health and Technology Innovation Center had built some 3D experiences so that as patients were getting care, it took them out of that environment. We've got very positive feedback to say, oh, it was nice to escape and feel relaxed and not just look around at a lot of people getting treatment, and giving a good escape for that. So that was kind of the first foray. That was late 2018 that actually won a Magnet Award. And that funding from the award is being used to kind of expand the use cases around that to find other ways to reduce patient anxiety or create more of a distraction in a positive way or an escape for different treatments. So that was very exciting and got some national coverage. We also hosted the Philadelphia Area Simulation Consortium, I guess in 2019. That was great too, because University of Pennsylvania, a lot of other Philadelphia area companies came to ChristianaCare, so we were able to kind of collaborate and see what technologies are out there and what's being used in the real world, what's sticking versus what's still future looking. And then more recently, Dr. Mark Schneider and I in the Applied Innovation Group did a study with University of Delaware. I believe Kevin Hawkins is on the line now as well. He helped participate in that as well, where we looked at time to insight. We used Virtualytics, we used Spatial to say, hey, if we put maybe a data scientist or data analyst in a room with subject matter experts and people that are, putting their hands on the flow itself, can you get to an insight quicker? So that one unfortunately got halted by COVID. We weren't actually able to carry out that full experiment. Looking forward to getting back to that hopefully soon. But now looking at some hardware and software platform advancements, we're very excited about using collaboration within ChristianaCare itself, as well as with some of our strategic partners. We're working with obviously a lot of the folks on the phone here, and as well as we have a value-based partnership with Medtronic, where we're now exploring, hey, we can collaborate with people regardless of location. Let's start to build some rooms and purpose collaboration to move that forward. So technology getting better too. I mean, you mentioned some of the things we were working with. One of the ones I'm very excited about now is the new Nreal glasses. These are augmented reality as well. They look more like sunglasses, right? So you're getting to the point now where it's not inconceivable to bring your executive team down to tell a story within an environment, right? And it's not that I'm putting on this big bulky headset, that is going to close me off to the rest of the world. It's pair of sunglasses. So you're still connected in the room. We're also experimenting with things like Venn spaces. Most people are probably familiar with a Venn diagram. So now if you take a table in one space and then clear across the world, you could have a similar sized table in that space. And then you get a physical with AR space to collaborate on and put maps and whatever you want to, 3D objects, and collaborate around it. So it's really opening up the world for us for collaboration.
That's super exciting. And I'm so glad you showed the Nreal glasses. I haven't seen those yet. That's awesome.
Nice.
Turning over to you, Bri, can you talk about some of the different use cases that Spatial provides from the collaboration perspective?
Absolutely. So Spatial is a platform, right? So we have really, as any use case that you can imagine, you can pretty much do in Spatial. And we consider it our job to create tools to facilitate this as best as possible. So one great example is our customer Nestle. So we work with them across a whole host of different use cases. One of which is like 3D design and data review. So one, they bring in their packaging design, and they'll go over their packaging they'll bring them into 3D stores and do like store layout. And so that's this like 3D design. They also are able to, of course, screen share information into Spatial. And this is actually something I want to side note that Spatial has a new release launching tonight, which is kind of serendipitous timing. And I'll talk a little bit about some of our features that are coming out that are directly related, especially to some use cases, such as data visualization. We have an app called Spatial Cast coming out tonight, which is it's for Mac only right now, but you can do like really fast kind of peer-to-peer sharing with audio and bring in multiple windows from your computer. And right now, multiple people can share in their screens, and it just does direct mirroring. And this is something that we hope to grow. We're calling it Spatial Cast right now, and it really builds speed on our roadmap over the next 6 months to a year to launch something that we call like full like hollow office, where you could do kind of like a virtual war room. But back to talking about Nestle's use cases, they also do a lot of team meetings in Spatial. So team meetings can take really any form. So I like people who do team meetings in Spatial are anyone from consultants to the fashion industry. And we have people that will do whole like project management to just one-on-ones or even like social happy hours, which we love. And then there's this whole other category of education. So we have, you know, Nestle as example does their sales training in Spatial. And then over the course of 2020, we've had a ton of universities, even medical schools doing simulations in Spatial and really taking it any angle that they want. And yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about the different use cases I've seen in Spatial, and maybe I'll pull up some more like to talk about as they come up. But you know, specifically on use cases that are enabled from our new release that's coming out, we are launching custom environments. So say you wanted to bring in a city map, instead of just having it on a table, you could actually set it as your entire world. And things like that. So we're really excited about all of that, as well as accessibility is something that's really key to us. So right now we're supporting like Magically HoloLens, and we support the Nreal, as well as the Quest 1, Quest 2, but we are launching PC VR support. So for the first time, we're going to support, of course, you know, a ton more headsets. So like the Valve Index, the HP Reverb, the Rift, all these headsets we previously didn't support, but it also gives us more compute power so that we can bring in more complex information.
That's awesome, and I appreciate you giving us some details on the upcoming features. One note, if any folks get involved with Spatial, the Spatial Slack group is a great way to look at some of the work that other folks are doing with Spatial and just see all the use cases and all of the different kinds of screenshots and things that people are sharing there. And moving on to you, Michael, you know, there's a lot of data stories that you've shared publicly, and you know, you pulled up one. You've had some viral success on TikTok, and so I think we've had the ability to see into the world of a lot of your clients and what they're doing with the platform. But can you talk to us a little bit about what some of the most effective data stories have been with your tool?
Sure. So I think so let me talk about the different use cases we've seen emerge, and then some of the storytelling techniques that really have worked best. So we were mostly working consulting, public policy, and finance. They're sort of our three key areas. And the key theme amongst all of this is that there is an external stakeholder that is not an expert. So anytime you're communicating with someone that's not deeply immersed in the data and knows everything about it already, that's where it flow shines. And I think TikTok and sort of these more public releases, and this sort of started when we were publishing stories around COVID-19. That was sort of the first instance where a lot of this started to take off because everyone has an interest in, and you know, using data as sort of that foundational stone by which we can all sort of find alignment and inform opinions is just very core. And so within there, there's use cases for the different mediums. And within those mediums, I'm just going to show quickly so you can, embed a flow on a website. In that case, it's way more of a interactive visualization that's self-guided. So instead of you being there for collaborative purposes, it's actually just there and it exists on the site itself. But that you, as you saw earlier, that we can actually host meetings with Flow where you're in the environments, whether you're in a headset or on a PC or on a phone, sort of irregardless of device, because at its core, it's the message that matters. And yeah, I've done all sorts of great experiments, and this is just one fun experiment where I had a baby in January, and so we kept track of all of the bottle changes, diaper feeds, breastfeeding instances, and hopefully any new parents can respect the amount of time it takes to have a child and how much time of the day. And I felt like this visualization, which is this rotating 24-hour clock, helps show you this wheel of nonstop action with your baby for the first at least 7 weeks here. And so this is just one fun visualization. I have many others. But at its core, the visualization is a piece of this. It allows you to better engage, better understand, and for someone that is not an expert, that they can literally point to something and say, what's that? And that's empowering to someone that doesn't necessarily know all the details of what you're going through. But at the end of the day, the things that are viral or the things that really take off is the story itself. What story are you telling? And the same mechanics of how do you tell a good story apply to data stories as well. Just saying, here's the data without sharing your point of view or your perspective and what the implications are is sort of meaningless. So you've got to start with why and continue to hammer home why and hitting that point. So I think the messages that sort of focus in on the implications are the ones that do best and that are supported by data and allowing people to immerse themselves. The one last thing I'll mention is that, the question we always get asked is, do you work with real-time data? And the answer is yes, but most people don't. And the reason they don't is because there is a narrative they're trying to share. They have a perspective and they don't necessarily want the data to be changing on them sort of on the fly. And so what we found is that, people actually want this more linear storyline they follow. And each one of those steps, we allow someone to drill into more details, but you don't necessarily want sort of one immersive space where you can go in all sorts of directions that typically people actually have some preparation or a specific story they're trying to tell. So yeah, that's sort of what we've learned a bit in terms of storytelling and some of the capabilities there.
Awesome. Thank you for that perspective. And it's been really interesting at the lab to explore the space and think about exactly what you said. What's the story first, and then how do we come back to that at the end with the technology and making sure that you have the right solution for the right end result. So Jim, at ChristianaCare, I wanted to ask you around how is your work expanding? So I know that your unit is sort of focused on research and finding use cases, and we've been lucky enough to collaborate with you on that. How do you see that expanding to a larger audience at ChristianaCare?
Sure. I think part of it's related to the hardware and the software platforms like Bri and Michael just talked about. They're advancing so rapidly. We're seeing releases come out regularly, sometimes multiple a month, with legitimate feature sets in those releases. That improves what we can do, the utility of those platforms, right? And then on top of that, you have the hardware that's just improving. A really good example is I think the new iPhones, the Pros and the iPad Pros added the LiDAR scanner. So that's very good at depth perception as well as mapping in 3D, right? So then that creates the ability to bring those environments into a virtual world and make them familiar and at scale and something that becomes more intuitive to then interact with. So we're seeing kind of the human or the emotional side of the AR VR collaboration as the kind of that important step that, it's not anymore just closing yourself in a helmet and trying to figure out what you're doing with complicated controllers. Most of the hardware is now using hand tracking. And so it's a more intuitive thing to say, I'm going to hit that button and I'm going to make this bigger. And so we're really focused on that user experience component and using that as kind of the foray into new use cases within the health system.
Excellent. I appreciate you giving us context there. It's definitely interesting to see that, and the hand tracking in particular is really exciting and definitely frees you from having those controllers and another barrier to the virtual world. And I guess talking about the hardware piece, and I'll pose this to any of the panelists. Where do you see the opportunity for the hardware in sort of nicely, what's the word I'm looking for, complementing the software? Where do you see some of the opportunity for the hardware to go in the future as more folks get AR and VR adopted in their workspace?
Yeah, I can speak to this a bit. So Spatial started as an augmented reality company, and not until the end of 2019 did we support VR at all. And of course, then 2020 happened, and not only did the Quest 2 hit a price point that made it more consumer friendly, and I think that the entire industry saw an effect from that. People can buy a $299 device and have access to this world. And also, of course, then the pandemic and remote work affected the industry as well, and hugely Spatial. We quickly saw an 1,000x increase in users, and that's like old data. I don't know what it would be right now. And we've recently hit 8 million minutes in Spatial, and so, I mean, speaking to the hardware, I think that it definitely has a big impact on usability. The launch of the Nreal, so they first launched in Korea and then Japan, and now they're launching in Europe, and it should soon launch in the US. I believe Jim probably has a developer kit. And so we're excited about that. We already support them, and that lightweight headset is a game changer because it makes something that people don't mind wearing. Actually, I had some great feedback from like the fashion industry where we were like, well, you can do more on the HoloLens or the Quest, but they're like, no, we want those ones that are stylish. Or like, can't blame you. And I mean, as far as where the hardware is going, I think that there's definitely this pull between AR and VR right now. I think that there's going to be a shift towards more devices that can do both. And I think that would benefit the industry greatly. And of course, aiming towards this vision of, lighter weight and just more accessible. The lighter and more accessible that this hardware can get, the more people are going to be open to adopting it.
And I'd like to share just a little bit of perspective on that as well, because we have definitely started out sort of with VR sort of at our core. The company was founded 4 years ago in 2016, and really was focused just on VR as the main mechanic. And we saw this as a revolutionary way to go through data. And anyways, but what we've really learned and respect is that we think of this now more as a road of adoption as opposed to a binary, either you're in or you're out. And what I mean by that is if we think about sort of the near-term road as like me sharing my screen here on Zoom, right? It's like, this isn't like some amazing thing. It's just like one iteration next. It's like, okay, instead of me screen sharing, you can see my face, you can see the content, and then I can invite you here and you can join it together. And then take that one step further. We add a QR code. You can actually join this on your phone and join this phone in AR mode, where you can actually, actually put this content in your room so anyone with a phone can actually see this content, interact, and be part of the meeting. And then we move on to the next iteration of VR, and then we have a Magic Leap iteration. And what we found is that as you go further along that pipeline, the level of immersion and the experience gets better, but your audience gets small. So the number of people you reach is going to be much smaller at the larger end or the further end, whereas much larger, if I publish a video that everyone can consume on their device, but the impact is relative as well. So that's the way we think of it. And I think the more we can think of this as a road and help push people down that pathway, we've seen firsthand on some UN calls where some people actually are in headset and then some people are not. And that by the end of that meeting, everyone has FOMO and wants a headset. And that's what we need in order to push this industry forward to drive adoption. It's that feeling like, oh, I'm missing out on something that's amazing, but I'm not excluded from the meeting entirely.
Just to comment on that, like I've seen that trend as well, and Spatial, also working with the UN, has seen them do exactly that in our app as well. But along with other people, there's definitely we've pushed a lot this year to one, get onto like iOS and Android so that people who don't have these devices have accessibility, as well as having a way to join via your desktop, and making that more accessible, because as much as these devices are getting to a better price point and a better place, enabling people who aren't yet there, who are not as comfortable, is great. And especially from the mobile perspective, everyone knows what mobile AR is. Everyone uses it, even if they don't think about it. Like, as you said before, like Snapchat, Instagram layers, like that's mobile augmented reality. And Jim mentioned like the LiDAR scanning, like Spatial. Now in our app, you can live LiDAR scan like anything from your coffee cup to your entire environment and upload it directly into Spatial and use it as your environment or hold it as a virtual object. So just integrating as much and taking full advantage of all the new technology that you have and like grabbing it as soon as it comes out.
Yeah, I really see the hardware as the major barrier to universal adoption right now, and it's mainly because of that price point, right? I mean, we have a pretty good roadmap for what we want collaboration software to do, because we want it to be, if it's AR, VR, like we're in a room with those people, right? And I think we're getting extremely close to that with the utility. But things like the glasses that I showed from Nreal, they're fantastic. They have a blackout thing you can snap on them too if you want to go full VR. But it's more around that, how many people can I get these in the hands of, and how much is it going to cost my corporation or my group or my whatever. If you're in business, we know a few use cases where people are shipping them to their customers and saying, keep them. They're cheap enough, but I want to show you, I want to meet with you and show you stuff in VR, AR, that kind of thing. So it really, that once I think that hardware gets to a point where it's already powerful enough for the adoption, but I think we need that price point to come down to the point where it's as acceptable as, I'm buying a monitor for everybody at work, because of course you need a monitor at work, right? Let's get to that point with some of these technologies, and I think it'll become more commonplace. Because the phone, everybody's got the phone. It does work well with the phone. But I like the analogy of, if we've all been on calls where we're in a physical meeting with maybe 10, 12 people around a table, and then there's one or two poor people that are on the phone and they get forgotten about. They never know when to interject. They try to interject and get talked over, right? It's kind of that when you're talking about, the AR, VR experience too. It's fully immersive. It takes you from something like this, which is always going to be a one-to-many presentation, and it's everything has to happen in series, to a many-to-many collaboration where you can have sidebar conversations going on within a XR space. You can have insights being worked on simultaneously, and it's just a different world.
Yeah, that example is exactly where Spatial started, is that idea of people being either on the TV or on the phone and everyone else being in there. And that's why we started in AR. Like, we're going to make them physically there as avatars. And then it's kind of snowballed. And now, of course, we have more people, actually by a lot, more people using VR than AR. But not going down a lot that I could say about that. But it's really interesting to see the shift, and to see how much the hardware is capable of changing the space and changing all of our softwares.
Jim, I love the comments on the one-to-many aspect of Zoom versus sort of like many-to-many. And I've sort of seen it firsthand, where we give a lot of talks at sort of universities, and every student's face just lights up when we get to this part where everyone has their phone and they're walking around the content, because they're actually out of their seat, moving around, seeing other people in the environments. It totally, gets away from sort of just feeling like this anonymous box on a screen. So yeah, totally, I love that.
So I see some chat questions coming in. Folks feel free to continue asking. I'm going to ask one more question I have written down, and then we can start to take some of those. So, we're talking about the price coming down. That's obviously a huge factor. We were sharing a Mark Zuckerberg interview from The Information the other week internally, where he's talking about, I think like 20% of folks at Facebook are now working on the XR space, which is, massive when you think about those numbers. So I think the cost will come down, that's for sure, as well as the ability to do both AR and VR in a single unit is definitely on the horizon. Let's say all that's true. What are the barriers to adoption you see organizationally? Again, this is for anybody. After the technology is accessible, it's something that the team could invest in. What are some of the pullbacks that folks have?
Yeah. One thing I want to just touch on is that I think that they're right now, because it's still gaining acceptance. The $299 Quest is at a price point that people can hit. But if you think about how much it is to have like a company phone, it's like easily $1,000+. I think that like light bulb's going to go off soon, where people are like, oh wait, actually it's way worth spending a little bit more money to get the better hardware. And I also think that it's going to be so synonymous with not only the workplace life, but our culture. And I think that's not as far off as a lot of people think. Then, I mean, as far as barriers to adoption, I think that it goes hand in hand, right? It's a fundamental like willingness to say, I'm gonna put this thing on my head and commit to this. What I tell people when they get started in Spatial, I'm like, choose a meeting that you already have every week. Plan on doing it in Spatial. And like that's it. Just commit to using it and then see how it grows. And have an idea of your use case. Feel free to try out different ones. And again, and it also goes into in a lot of ways storytelling. You have to build that story. You have to shape this as you're part of this. You're on this cutting edge. You're building this momentum towards digital transformation is what a lot of companies would say, and really just reinforcing that and making it fun. Like something we build as many productivity tools in Spatial as we think about like how can we make this more fun. And an example is like we work with Ford's advanced manufacturing, and they're bringing in like engines. They also do happy hours. So it's creating this feeling of bringing people together. And I think once people feel that fun aspect of it, then they're sold on the work aspect of it and the togetherness.
So I have a perspective based on lots of demos here, which is that especially when we were all in person, the biggest barrier was actually when you're in VR, you are disconnected from your environment inherently. And the second someone else takes a photo of you in VR is the second you realize, yes, that actually makes it a horrible experience. And I think where we push when we get into augmented reality, and agree with Jim, that Nreal and all these AR tech, I'm really excited about, because it's enhancing your existing world as opposed to taking it away from you. And this goes to one of Chris's questions in the comments. I do think that VR has sort of gotten definitely a big bump from us all being remote, because wearing a headset and being worried about what people are looking at me and all these other aspects are sort of moot at this point, because we're just in our pajamas at home, working. So in that sense, I think there has been sort of a boom in that sense. But I think where we'll see the big adoption is going to be when it is enhancing your environments. If you watch Star Wars, we all are watching, like looking at the AR Death Star in front of us. We're not, putting on VR headsets and watching it that way. So I think that future reality of how we interact with information, where it's floating in front of us, is going to be true.
Yeah, Michael, great point with the vulnerability of putting on a full headset. I've seen that so many times. That tends to be the two biggest comments to not wanting to do full-on VR are, I don't want to mess my hair up and I don't want to be vulnerable, however that's phrased, right? You see those a lot, which is why I'm a big fan of that. We have the HoloLens 2, and the Nreal tend to be the fan favorites so far. But Apple's, rumored to bring out glasses. There's several others too. So I think that's going to be a huge adoption curve too. The other, I guess, plus in the AR column is it tends, at least in the ways we're using it, to provide a little more engagement, because there's movement in your navigation of the virtual environment, right? Like you can, if you're in total VR with controllers or even your hands, you pretty much can slump back in your chair and navigate the space. Whereas when you're in AR, you're actually moving through scatter plots or moving through environments that are virtual, walking up to someone and talking to them. And I know that some of the new spatial features that actually play with the audio volume as you move closer to people, or you can step away and, you know, have a sidebar and not disturb others, those kind of things. I think that's a big component of that, you know, that vulnerability, as well as we've encountered quite a few people that have nausea. Even, you know, I'm not talking about like, hey, I'm in a jet fighter on my VR. I mean, literally just attending a meeting in VR will get nauseous, just, you know, the way the frequencies are. So that AR, that I haven't seen that happen yet, which is fantastic.
That's a great point, and I think the principles that we're all touching on, you know, once we do have that adoption, are really important. And there's a question in the chat around new rules and guidelines to learning how to interact with the environment, and then specifically around how to represent data in VR AR spaces. So, you know, Michael, do you want to talk about some of the best practices that your team has implemented, and then the rest of the panelists, you know, maybe just some of the best practices for AR VR in general?
Absolutely. So I always start with sharing geospatial data, because it's the easiest for us all to understand in terms of, okay, here's a map. Now we're seeing bars on a map. It's like, I get that. That's just very easy to comprehend where the value is. It's like you're adding this dimensional layer to a 3D analysis. And what I'd say is that, you know, the first thing we always see customers do is take their 2D thing and just try to make it 3D. And then suddenly that's going to add value. And that's not really the case. You have to really be cognizant of what you're building. And so, you know, one such example is even just looking at disease spread, so more of a network graph, and what you think of as data. And one challenge, this is sort of moving more exponential or further beyond this, but if you think about even just a PowerPoint in and of itself is a hierarchy of information that's, you know, you are connecting points together to form sort of this thesis. And so you can actually represent that as data, right? That if you think of those slides, that text as data, that in itself becomes a structure. And so that's starting to transform how you think of building in these immersive environments. It's really about, how can I show the forest and the trees, that you can see the big picture of what's going on, but then be able to drill into some of those details. And I think that's really what the value of the three-dimensional space is. And the only other thing I'll add on is that it's not only the 3D-ness, but it's the animation. It's the ability to tell a story and build that story. So you're not just seeing one static image of here's everything at once, digest it. It's here, let me add each layer at a time. And by doing so, you're constructing a story and making sure everyone's following along with you. So that's more of the storytelling capabilities. And so, you know, you know, especially for the data viz world, if you ever read any data viz textbooks, and I read them all the time, the first thing they say is don't put it in 3D. Just don't do it. Like 3D bar graphs on a 2D medium, of course that doesn't make sense. And I totally agree. But we're now entering this age where we have the technology and we have the medium by which we can immerse ourselves in 3D. And the way we think about it is that inherently our mental models are three-dimensional, and that we are now expressing those mental models for the first time. And it's a learning curve for us all. We're defining a new medium in many regards, but it's been really exciting to see what works and what doesn't. So I can go on, but hopefully that is illustrative.
Yeah, I love your point about, you know, not making things 3D if it doesn't make sense for them to be, because of course, you know, you're working in a 3D medium. You're like, oh, I want to make this 3D and that 3D. People who have physical products, I'm like, yeah, you have the models already. If you already have it as a model to do your job normally, immediately bring it in. When it comes to things like people who are bringing in data, I'm like, if you have something that makes sense as a 3D piece of data, bringing it in as a model. Otherwise, you know, we have all these other ways to bring in information, because Spatial can pull in PDFs, JPEGs, PowerPoints, you know, videos. You know, you can cast or share your screen. The easiest way to get started as far as best practices is just pull in what you're already using. We're not trying to change everything all at once. And so just these file formats that you're already working in, pull them in, and then when you need to get to a point of like bringing in and making it more 3D, do so at that point, not unnecessarily, because in some cases it'll just overcomplicate things.
Yeah, and I will say that's a tough balance, Bri. You know, on one hand, it's like, well, well, why are we going into an immersive environment when we look at 2D things, right? It's like, well, what's the point of being in a spatial environment if we're not going to look at spatial elements? And I think there's some truth to that. And so on sort of the PowerPoint example, it's we think of it really as like you can build this information space more. And one thing that we try to keep in most of our designs is this element of you don't want information to disappear. So we've studied a little more of the brain science aspect of it, but when you go from one slide to the next, you sort of, all the information disappears and something new appears that you can't connect those together necessarily. But by showing data as it progresses from one step to the next and seeing how it changes, that you start to build more of this mental model of how everything works together. So yeah, it's these small things in combination that really make the most impact, but it's each one in isolation is sort of a very small piece, I guess, of the puzzle.
Absolutely. I love taking someone who will send me like a 30-page PowerPoint and just ripping it apart and uploading them as separate images and putting them all the way around the room. And I'm like, this is just like people, our brains, of course, we work spatially, but just as far as an engagement principle, like you have the space, like, use it.
I love that. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Sorry, Ben. Yeah, to that point, I was just thinking of some more basic etiquette that we encounter at ChristianaCare when you put people in an environment that they've never been in before. And I was laughing because I was thinking of one of the, I did some of the beta testing with some of the spatial features, and often you'll get in a room and people will be like, oh, this is cool. And everybody will be talking, and it's like, just the basic etiquette really comes into play as well, right? So one session I was in, somebody was stretching out something. I think it was something goofy like a 3D dinosaur, but made it so big that we were all inside it. So then the presenter was like, I can't see anybody anymore. Where'd everybody, it was just goofy stuff like that. That actually happens more than you think in these environments, right? Because people just the talking part, right? So it is nice to have universal mute, but you're then defeating the collaboration, right?
Yeah.
So, we like to try and put people in it and say, like, one of the things we'll say a lot is just, you can't describe what it's like. Just don't even try. You've got to put the headset on people. Like, once they see it, they get it. So we like to try and do that. And, we're building this new innovation lab space to do specifically that, so that people can come and test and try. And whether it's a demo mode or, as Bri said, a first meeting, that kind of thing, we help to facilitate that, because you can get really close to a full-on physical workshop with nobody in the same building, as long as there's that etiquette's established. So just the basic ground rules of, hey, if you're going to talk, realize we can all hear you unless you step away, or if you, take a sidebar or go into a breakout room, those kind of things. But all of that applies. So it took us a while to figure that out.
I do want to just add, we did, since that beta session, we did add host tools. So the host has full control of the room now. And so that doesn't happen anymore. And yeah, always people who are joining for the first time, the first thing I say is, look left, look right, give them a high five, don't walk through them.
Yeah, that would happen a ton too, where I'd be in a meeting and somebody would materialize into the meeting, and then I would see this, I'd be like, hello, I'm right in this space already, because you're not really there. So that's another piece of the virtual space that gets entertaining.
Yeah, it reminds me of and this might actually touch upon one of the points around sort of adoption, is that I think the first thing we all think about when we think of like, okay, we're going to go into this VR environment, is we try to recreate the world around us. So it's like, there's a table in VR and we're going to meet around this table. But the table serves no purpose, right? There's no like functionality of the table or the chairs or all these elements. And I think if you think of the analogy for like movies and they took radio hosts and just put a film them while they're talking, and that was sort of the next iteration of, and then they went further with TV of where could they go with the medium. And I think in the same way, we're sort of defining this new medium and what works and what doesn't. And I think where it gets exciting is when we start to push into these elements of what can you do in VR that you can't do in real life. And I think that's where it gets really exciting to start to see the world of possibility beyond the table, essentially. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think as we all learned at the start of the pandemic and going virtual, Zoom etiquette is something that exists, and VR etiquette or AR etiquette is going to be a thing as there's increased adoption. Well, we're right at the hour here. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much. I really found value in this conversation, and I hope the rest of the audience did as well. I think I'm passing it over to Devin to wrap it up.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and thank you to our panel. This is amazing, but just a special thanks to Ben Cates for moderating this and getting everyone together. So thank you. We will be putting out a few more meetups coming up, but we will get those out to you online and share them as well. So